All right, good evening, everyone. Excited to be here and being able to share. Thank the Lord for another day. Thank Him for His grace, His mercy, His all of the love, all of the knowledge that He's willing to share with us. Y'all know Thursdays are my favorite days, so I'm glad to be here with you all and preparing our hearts and minds for Bible study. We are in week 7, which means that we are in Genesis chapter 7. And I really want to encourage you all to share this with other people who, regardless if they only watch like one episode, the series is something you can always go back to watch. But I think that the book of Genesis is the most important book we could ever study and read for ourselves as his children. We are not going to understand the kingdom of God. We are not going to understand our present day, how to overcome trials, how to live life properly if we do not study Genesis, y'all. I have always loved the book, and so the last few years, of course, I have dived into it for myself, and I said, well, let me share with some other people who might be interested in what the story of Genesis has to share. So I am live on YouTube. If anybody on TikTok wants to double click on my profile, you can hop on over to my YouTube channel and you can see the screen because I'm sharing Genesis 7 on there in the NLT version. As you know, you can read whatever version your heart so desires, but let's jump into it. We normally read all the way through, then we come back up and we talk about it from the top. Okay, so we are going into Genesis 7. Again, I'm reading in the NLT. I'm going to start with that. All right, and it reads, when everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. Also, take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and a female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. He went on board the boat to escape the flood. He and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. Verse 9, they entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. That very day, Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind. Two by two, they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes. A male and female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. For 40 days, the flood waters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains of the earth on the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. All the living things on earth died: birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small plants that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. God wiped out every living thing on the earth: people, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky. all were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with him in the boats. And the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days. All right. If you recall from last week, we were reading chapter 6. So we're going to take this back to the top. We were introduced to Noah at the end of chapter 5 when we were given the genealogy, and we talked about how critical the genealogy is because God does not leave a detail out that we don't need to know and understand. And I believe that He gave us Genesis 5 so we would always be able to go back to the start and the beginning of Genesis, and we would be able to trace the beginning of time up into our present day. Anybody who says, oh, this record is lost to time or we don't know the timeline is lying, because if you open your Bible to Genesis chapter 5, it will tell you from the first man all the way through to Noah, how long each one lived. And that is critical information. So we know that based on last week, we had gotten to a point in the timeline of Earth called the antediluvian period, which means pre-flood, ante meaning before. So it means pre-flood period. We had gotten to a time as a people where we were so corrupt that it justified God wiping out creation. And I talked last week a lot about the fact that I don't think we can really imagine what life would have been like in a, not only in pre-flood geography wise, because the earth would have looked nothing like it is now, that the soil and everything would have been different. But I don't really think we can understand the level of corruption that we were at. Maybe we have some things to compare it to now where we can say, like, oh, well, maybe they were doing this, oh, well, maybe they were doing that. The level of corruption was so bad that God explains to us that the sons of God, meaning the fallen angels who had fallen from God's graces with Satan, got kicked out of heaven. Those sons of God made it with women on earth, and they created this whole sort of different human angel species, if you will, that really corrupted the actions, hearts of men. And so that level of evil that existed at that time justified, because it said that everything that people thought and did was evil from conception. There was no saving. And for the creator to say that there is no way I can save the people I have created, that's a lot. That tells us a lot about what was going on at the time. And I need you to maybe jot that down and reflect on that, because we never would want to get to that point where our salvation is not even justified. It's not worth saving. We so bad to the core that it's not worth saving. But He did have a way, because of a righteous man, to save mankind, so He didn't have to start from scratch. And so we saw last week in Genesis 6 how the Lord had instructed Noah to go build a boat. He said, "You're the only righteous one left," and that's exactly how verse chapter 7 is starting off as well. Like, you're the only righteous one left. It is specifically saying Noah is the only one person, even in his family. He's the only one that is considered righteous. And it said that in chapter 6, it said that it described Noah as walking in close fellowship with the Lord. And again, we tied that back to genealogy, because I was reminding you all that in chapter 5, when it gave us the genealogy, it talked about Enoch, and Enoch walking closer with the Lord. And Enoch was Noah's great grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, or great great grandfather, one of the two. Him walking close fellowship with the Lord. So their lineage of people who understood righteousness, who understood what it meant to worship the Lord by name, who understood who the Lord God is, and therefore they could live a life that was pleasing to Him. And so that is no coincidence that he was in that lineage of people. So the first thing it tells us in Genesis chapter 7, when everything was ready, meaning everything that the Lord had instructed him to do. Remember last week in chapter 6, He tells him how long to build the ark, how wide to build the ark, how high to build the ark. He told him to put a window that was 18 inches wide at the top, all around the top of the ark. He told him to put a door on the side. He told him what kind of wood to make it with, which is gopher wood. He told him how to seal the wood, which is used tar inside and outside of the ark. He told him in the interior of the ark, God is the best architecture, right? He told him in the interior ark to build the stalls, and he told him to store enough food for all the animals and all the people. So when everything was ready, all of that was done. It doesn't tell us, at least yet, how long that took for that to happen. But we do know that Noah was 500 years old when he had three children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And is going to tell us later on how old he was when the flood started. So we know that sometime between him having children and him in the flood starting, this is when, it says when everything was ready. This is giving us a time frame of when this happens. The Lord said to Noah, go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. That's so good. I can see that you alone are righteous. I can imagine Noah getting instructions from the Lord when he was first building the ark, and then being reaffirmed when he's done doing what the Lord said to do. And it's almost like hearing, well done, thy good and faithful servant. I'm not saying that this was Noah's end time and that he got that message, well done. But for me, if I was to hear, go into the boat, meaning take this blessing that I have allowed you to build and go and be saved, because you alone are righteous, that's saying you're doing something right. You're living well. And that is a humbling blessing and a humbling compliment, to receive. So then it says, take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each kind of animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. So this is two different sets of animals we're talking about here. Now, in Genesis 1, God creates the earth, right? And he tells Adam and Eve that I have given you all of the plants and trees for your food. By the time we get to 7, we see that the food has changed, because each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice. In other words, clean animals. These are the animals that I have approved. Somehow, some way, they knew through their walk with the Lord that these animals I'm permitting you to eat, and other animals I am permitting you not to eat. Now, I'm not saying that it's like this in present time. What I'm just pointing out to you is that from Genesis 1 to Genesis 7, things shift. But remind you, we're in a whole new millennia at this point. This is like 1656, I believe, years, or 1658 years after the creation. So we're talking about 1,656 years later. This is what is happening. And there are animals. So obviously sacrifices happen. We know sacrifices happen because when we read Cain and Abel, we saw that the sacrifice happened when they were given their first fruits. So it's a precedent for it, but we never saw, when did the Lord teach him that? But somehow Noah knew. How would Noah know if he does not commune with the Lord, if the Lord does not speak to him, if he does not show him things? That's part of this like whole righteousness. Because he communes, because he's fellowshipping. That's the difference between Noah and the rest of us. And I'm not saying you're not righteous, right? I'm just putting us all in the bucket of people who are not like Noah, because there was a level of fellowship that Noah had. And that is important for us to take away from the story of Noah. His righteousness was so important for us to understand that he's mentioned in Hebrews 11 to explain those who live righteously, so that we would have examples of people who have done right by God, who live right with God. So there's a reason why Noah knows this information. So there's 7 pairs. So it's more than just 2 animals per kind, because there are 7 pairs of every clean and sacrificial animal. Now we could compare this with Leviticus, because Leviticus does give a breakdown of clean animals, but we don't know. We don't have evidence that list is the same list. We can only kind of assume based on the information that's given. I just wanted to point to you that there are animals that are approved for eating and for sacrifice, and this is a difference from Genesis 1. And that one little detail, somebody might read over it, but I think it's really important to pull out those things. And take 1 pair of each of the others. So all the animals that he has not approved for sacrifice, he has not approved for eating. It doesn't mean that these are bad animals. It just means that this is not something you would put on the altar to God to sacrifice, and you would not eat and consume it in your body, because it's not really for you. That means it's for another portion of creation. Okay, so this is one way that diet changed from the beginning of time to now, and that's only in the 2nd millennium. All right, so now verse 3. Also, take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. Now, I thought that this was even more interesting than taking 7 pair of animals for eating and sacrifice, because we can understand that, okay, if they're going to be eating during the whole time of this flood, they're going to need some stuff to eat and sustain them. So that makes sense. They also are going to be praying, gratitude, thanks. They're going to have that time during this time of the flood. So they'll need something to sacrifice. Makes sense. But when it said take 7 pairs of every kind of bird, I kind of paused and I'm like, all the other animals, it's just 1 pair. So it's just a male and female. You got one chance to reproduce and to make something of your species to repopulate this earth. But for the birds, he gave 7. And so it got me to thinking, and this is just my own personal reflection. So I'm showing y'all how when I read, it might make me pause and I might highlight something or write something down like, how come it's like this? Or how come it says this? So when I see it says of every kind of bird, I'm thinking, okay, well, where do birds live? Or what's their domain? Well, their domain is in the sky, right? So they fly around the sky. I know that they have certain patterns of flight. I know that they can tell the seasons really well, and like they indicate a lot of information. They also spread seeds from one area to another area. So I'm just kind of thinking of like all the importance of birds as to why birds specifically would be 7 pairs of those birds. This is in addition to whatever is being taken for eating and for sacrifice. In addition to that 7 pair of every kind of parrot, every kind of parakeet, every kind of blue jay, red robin, all the things you can think of, all the state birds, 7 pairs of every kind of geese, chicken, or whatever. 7 pairs. And so I just think of the vastness of the sky, So in what is it, day 3, if I'm blanking, excuse me, I think it was day 3, or it might have been day 2 when God made the expanse and he put the separation between the waters of heaven and the waters of earth. So that whole space of sky is really a mystery. And I know that people study it, like astrology or astronomy, excuse me, but it's still like a mystery because we don't really fully understand how God has made these different atmospheres in the sky and how they function. But obviously birds are important enough so where it needed to be 7 of them to repopulate. And that might have something to do with like the flight patterns and their indication of the seasons and how they follow the times. That's my theory. So sorry to take y'all down that rabbit hole, but that's how I think when I'm studying. When we study the Bible, it's literally for us to learn from what God has presented information. But when you're learning, you have to kind of figure out why, and you have to make it make sense. And sometimes you have to ask questions. Sometimes you just pray about it. Sometimes it comes later. Sometimes it doesn't come at all, and we have to be okay with that. And sometimes you just find out information as you go on and live life, and it's like an aha moment that'll come to you. So let's go down to verse 4. God also, this is the whole time God is speaking to Noah. He's giving him he said, go into the ark. He said, take the clean animals and the unclean as well as those for sacrifice. He said, take 7 pairs of every bird. Then he tells them 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So he re-emphasizes what he told him initially. And he says, exactly 7 days from now, this is going to start. So you got 7 days in order to enter and make sure all is well and to, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. In case you forgot what I said the first time, before you was building that ark, let me remind you, so you can prepare your heart, your mind, you can prepare your people for 40 days and 40 nights. He said, until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So you say, well, why did it have to rain for 40 days and 40 nights? Because until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. The Lord knew how much time it was going to take of rain coming down day and night. It was nonstop rain in order to destroy and wipe from the earth everything. Remember, because all the animals is in this too. So it doesn't matter how high you run or where you go to, everything's getting destroyed. And this also is an indication for, I know evolution, maybe you all are heard of different theories, but the level of rain that was coming down on earth, it literally needed to fill the earth. So just like when we see hurricanes on the news and we see how hurricanes will destroy a whole and flood a whole area, the waters need to rise. But the waters don't need to just rise how they would in your house. They need to rise above your house. They need to rise into the trees house. They need to, like, it's literally like he's filling the earth where he's just pouring water, pouring water, pouring water from everywhere. So it needed to literally fill the earth. So it has to rain for such a time. It's hard to imagine because we only experience floods when it comes to like maybe like natural disasters or like a pipe burst or something. But literally imagine not being able to escape the water. So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. Now we see this as a pattern for Noah because this is where the righteousness comes in. In chapter chapter 6, it says, so Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. In chapter 7, it's telling us, so Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. Noah had such a relationship with the Lord that the Lord would speak to him, tell him instructions to do, and Noah's going to go follow them. He didn't have to ask any questions. He didn't have to say, Lord, are you sure? Well, what about this? He didn't have to question his plan. He could just be told and he could do. And I think that that's the level that the Lord wants us to also get to, where he can command something and we just do it. We don't have to question if he knows what he's doing, if he's considered all these possibilities. He gave him instructions. He didn't ask him any questions. Noah just did it. That's important for the level of righteousness that we have been explained to about Noah. So then it says in verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. And if you have any questions, y'all can feel free to drop them in the comments. I'm moving back and forth so I can check questions before we move on, because I don't, if it's something that you need to understand about a certain section, like ask that then. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. He went on board the boat to escape the flood, he and his wife and his sons and their wives. So obviously, it said Noah did everything as the Lord commanded. So now it's telling us what Noah did. It's also telling us how old Noah was when the flood covered the earth. So we can mark the flood in time. We know exactly when it happened. It happened when Noah was 600 years old. We can backtrack that date from the beginning of time all the way through all the other people. He's in the 10th generation of mankind. 600 years old when the flood came. He was 500, like I told you before, when his children were born. He was 600 when the flood covered the earth. That's a good, very a good expanse of time that we can jot down and we can note. And remember, the timeline that I referenced for y'all 2 weeks ago, it is in the Bible study guide that I've shared. And if you want that information, you can double click the profile, sign up for my newsletter, and it will send you the Bible study guide, and the timeline is in there if you want to see my spreadsheet on how I track the time, because it's all right there in the Bible for everybody to do the math. Okay, it says he went on board the boat to escape the flood, him, his wife, and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. This is saying that these were the instructions God gave him in 1 through 4. And then in 6 through 10, this is the instructions that Noah followed. The instructions that Noah followed match exactly the instructions that the Lord commanded him to, down to the number of animals, the pairs, male and female. And do not take it lightly that every time the Lord mentions these animals, he says male and female, because these animals were designed to repopulate the earth. And we are gotta be the only generation dumb enough to think, oh, you don't need a male and a female to repopulate. In Noah's day, he did not say take two males or two females, a male and a female. Even the people who were on the boat matched in pairs, male and female. So why we have veered away from his command, I don't know. He made the pattern for a reason, and we just tend to want to change things so much from what God has designed. All right. And this is necessary for life to exist after the flood. So in verse 10, it says, after 7 days, the water of the flood came and covered the earth. Now, this is more specifics about what happened with the flood. Okay, in verse starting in verse 11. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. Now we have to parse out this particular portion in 11 and 12 because he says a lot in here. He was 600 years old on the 17th day of the second month. Now, this is very particular information because I really do think that God likes math because he wants us to be able to track with him what a day is, how to track time. He gives us the specifics of all of these things. And he says specifically, just to clarify for anybody who might question this, that this happened on the 17th day of the second month. Now, we start, not we, I should say, the Gregorian calendar starts the new year in January. I just did a video on this yesterday. The new year does not start in January, in the middle of winter. This says the 17th day of the second month. Now, if we were to go based on the biblical calendar that I believe personally always existed, even in this day and time, it would have been in the spring. So that would have been around April. April or May. No, sorry, not April. April would have been about the new year. So between May and June would have been the second month of the 17th day. We know based on Exodus 12 that the new year starts in the spring because he tells them that this will be a new year. He's talking about Passover, and he says that this time will be a new year unto you. Now, I think when he's saying that, he's referencing the Egyptian calendar and making sure that they understand the difference between what the Egyptians might do and what the Hebrews are called to do. So he's reminding them of the calendar. At any rate, we know that it was not February 17th. That's not what this is saying. The 17th day of the second month means whichever month or time that this started, this was the 17th day of that second month. And so likely it would have been late spring. So May-ish. And this is what happened as soon as that day hit. All the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. Now, I know that we understand that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It did not just rain pitter patter for 40 days and 40 nights. The sky opened up and it said, rain, the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. And all the underground waters erupted from the earth. That does not mean that a puddle just absorbed water from a well or something and just can't. You talking about, like, think of like a volcano and how a volcano erupts. But think about that happening with water. All the geysers across the world, everything is rushing with water. Water is coming in torrents from the sky. Water is coming from under the ground. Now, where did all this water come from? We got to go to the beginning. In Genesis 1, when the earth was created, it was nothing but water. There is such a vast amount of water. God has an unlimited supply of water. Before the earth appeared, before he called forth the land to appear, it was just water. The Holy Spirit hovered the waters. Heaven is made of waters. Earth is made of water. It's just water. So where did all this underground water come from? What do you think is under the land? I know that earth science taught y'all, like it taught me in middle school, that the middle of the earth is a core and it's got molten lava. I don't believe that. You can't even pay me to believe that, because Genesis says that all the underground waters erupted from the earth. in their model, it's no way is that much water under the earth. But in God's model of the earth, there is that much water in the earth. It's not going to be, y'all know volcanoes have molten lava, but they don't have the level of molten lava that the earth has of water. It's just filled with water everywhere. And we don't even understand the depths of the ocean. They have tried to get to the deep parts of the ocean. They cannot go. Y'all remember a few years ago, they tried to send that submarine. What happened to that submarine? Submarine disappeared. Never came back. Nobody knows what happened to that submarine. What we do know is they could not find what they needed to find because the water is so deep. It's dark and it's deep and it's just parts of it we don't know about. So God got water for days, obviously for 40 days and 40 nights. So it says that the waters erupted. And I know sometimes we might think of like an earthquake, or maybe we think of a volcano eruption, but they say it's really more so compared to what would have been like a nuclear explosion, the level of the eruption that happened on the earth of water would have been more like a nuclear explosion type of level of eruption. So that shares a lot with us about that level. Um, and then it says the rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. I also want to point out that there are a lot of people who believe that it did not rain prior to Noah's day. And I just want to ask the question of where is the evidence that it did not rain in Noah's day? All creation told us in the creation story was that in the initial creation of land that it did not rain. But we're talking about 1,600 years later. Y'all think that God never allowed it to rain? How would Noah know what to prepare? How essential it would be to prepare, and why would God tell him that he's going to cause it to rain if Noah doesn't know what it's like to rain? So they like to paint this picture that they were living in this earth that was almost like a California type of vibe, where it just was always sunny and it never rains. And the Bible never says that it never rains. It never rained like this, but it never says that it never rained. I want to go back to Genesis 1 to further prove my point, and then we're going to jump back to 7. So let's go here because I want to show you what does it actually say in Genesis 1 about the rain. So we are going to go to 1. I should have looked this up before, so I do apologize, but I just thought about like, let me just show y'all. So we got day 1, dark and light. Day 2 is the sky. So remember I was talking about the birds, that's the sky. Day 3 was all the waters beneath the sky flowed into one place, so dry ground appeared. The land sprout with vegetation. So when land appeared, of course, that was the vegetation as well. The land produced vegetation, seed-bearing plants, That was all day 3. Lights appeared in the sky, day 4. So we got sun, moon, and stars on day 4. The fish in the sea and the birds of the sky happened on day 5. So let's just recap creation until I find this. It might be in Genesis 2. And then the earth produced every sort of animal on day 6, along with the creation of mankind. Okay, so that's all on day 6. And then day 7, the good old Sabbath was created. All right. Now, I'm trying to read fast and it is not. I wanted to point it out. If somebody knows the verse that I'm looking for, let me know. But I wanted to point out the fact that it's basically, y'all know how we get dew in the morning. It basically was explaining that because the Lord had not watered the earth with rain, he allowed dew to come and water the earth. But that was only in Genesis 1. So that's like how they developed the land in the first place, like what was allowed to grow in the land. No, I thought I was gonna find it. I didn't find it. Let's go back to verse 7. Chapter 7. So all you need to do is think about sometimes when people are convinced, because I think it sounds really good for us to say, oh, it didn't rain in Noah's day until the flood happened. That's not what the Bible says. There is like no biblical evidence for that. Like none at all. And if you find it, please send it to me, because I would love to read the biblical evidence that says that there was no rain in Noah's day. But it sounds really good for us to say that, oh, Noah had so much faith that he don't even know what it was to rain, but he went and built the ark. Y'all making the story up. You're embellishing the story, and you got to be very careful never to embellish the Bible, because it never said that it did not rain. Um, but we know that the underground waters erupted, and we know that the rain fell from the sky for 40 days and 40 nights. And then in verse 13, it tells us that the very day Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, with them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind. Just in case we were confused, if every animal went onto the boat, every animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind. Your tigers and your cattle were on the same boats. Your bears and your lions were on the same boats as the crickets and the roaches. Two of every kind. Literally means two of every kind. Now, it don't mean just two bugs. No, every kind of bug. Okay, so two by two, they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes. Now, it says a male and female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind him. This is very important. Two by two, they went into the boat, regardless if it was one pair of it or seven pairs of like the clean animals and the birds. They went on the boat two by two. I'm pretty sure Noah had a great inventory of who was on his boat, where they were supposed to be, and he probably named the animals. I don't know. But two by two, they went on their boat. There are animals who we know of that existed before that do not exist today. That has nothing to do with the flood, because every animal had the chance to survive and repopulate their species. The fact that we don't have dinosaurs anymore just tells us the fact that we don't have dinosaurs anymore. It doesn't mean that humans existed after the dinosaurs. Like, that is the dumbest. That just don't make sense. You gotta read it through the eyes of Genesis. And then it tells us that a male and a female of each kind entered. Again, for repopulation, it's emphasizing male and female. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. Now, that is good, because people might say like, oh, well, how come, the boat didn't sink or the water didn't get in? We know how God had him build the ark. We know that kind of wood he had him build. We know that tar was used to seal the ark. But this is the most important part. The Lord closed the door behind them. When they follow his instructions, the Lord provided safety for them. If the Lord didn't close the door, then for all we know, they could have the water could have seeped into the wood, into the door, into the crevice. But when the Lord closes a door and when he opens the door, there is no man who can then close an open door or open a closed door. So it says the Lord closed the door behind him. That's his protection during the time. He knows that this flood is going to be mighty. He knows that this flood is going to tear up the boat was probably swaying from left to right in the first few days when that eruption happened. But he closed the door behind them to seal them in. He had already provided for all their protection. He gave them provision, just like he gave Adam and Eve provision in the Garden of Eden and them everything they needed. He did the same thing. This is provision that God gave to Noah and his family. So it says in verse 17, for 40 days the flood waters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. So it's telling us kind of like how deep this thing is. If we look outside today, obviously we have skyscrapers and stuff, But if you look at like a normal building, let's say it's like 2 stories high. Well, the flood waters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. So it was higher than your house. It was higher than the mansion in your city. It's higher than the skyscraper that is downtown. It's higher than all of that. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. So the boat did, because of God's provision, the boat did what it was supposed to do to protect Noah, his family, and all the animals that Noah was protecting. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. That is the amount of water that you need to cover the earth. Mama. And then to not just cover the earth like on a surface cover, to have it grow deeper and deeper. I'm sure no one of them might have been peeking out that window like, how much water can we possibly take? 22 feet above the highest peaks. I don't know what the highest mountain is. I think it's like Kilimanjaro, Everest, one of them, right? Might be something in Alaska. I don't know. One of those mountains. 22 feet higher than one of those mountains that people die on to climb. God's water rose 22 feet above it. There was no land that was not covered. No piece of land that was not covered. All the living things on the earth died. Birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. All. All. Every animal, every wild animal, every domestic animal, every small, teeny, tiny animal, every person died. There would have been no way for anybody to survive. You could be the best swimmer. You can't do it. First of all, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. So good luck trying to survive in rain, not only the water trying to swim in it, but also the fact that it's still raining. Torrents from the sky to rain to cover the earth. I think when we think of the flood, we're like, oh, well, it rained and it just kept raining, it kept raining. So we think of like the rain like a normal thunderstorm. No, 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 no. 10 times that. Torrents. It says torrents. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. Why did it die? Because I know a lot of people say, like, oh, well, God killed people and the animals. First of all, God created it. And if God created it, he can kill it. He don't want to, but we gave him no choice. We talked about that a lot last week. The level of corruption that we were living in, the animals were living in, everything that he had created, we were evil to the core. He had no choice because that is not how he designed us to live. And so we talked last week about the fact that God had to continue striving for humans because he wants us to be saved. He wants us to dwell with him. So in order for him to even bless us, he shortened our lifespan as a benefit to us because there was no way that we were going to be able to continue to make it with him if we lived a long, 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 long life. There was no way. Because we don't know how to act. And we need a shorter life so that we would know that like we don't have immorality to just do anything that we want to do. So we talked about that last week. So if you missed that, you should go back and read 6 and watch that episode as well. Because we literally gave him no chance because of the level of our corruption. It then says in 23, God wiped out every living thing on the earth. People, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky. All were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with him in the boats. That's 8 people. He had 3 sons, and they had 3 wives. They each had a wife. And then you had Noah and his wife. That's 8 people. The only people who survived because of Noah's righteousness. And the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days. So we can add 150 days to our now timeline of when this flood may have been over. Because it says the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days, and it's going to give us some more instructions next week as far as details is concerned. But we know that this flood started when Noah was 600 years old. Back up here in verse 11, it tells us on the 17th day of the second month. That is when the flood started. It lasted on the earth. The flood waters covered the earth. This is after the 40 days. The flood waters covered the earth for 150 days. So you gotta go 190 days beyond this. So we're into what we would probably consider like a December-ish timeline, November, December-ish timeline. And we started in May. And I say that just because so you can recognize it like on the calendar that we use as far as Gregorian calendar. By the way, the biblical New Year is coming up. So if you did not know, the 12th month just started yesterday with the new moon. New moons means new months. That's according to the Bible. And the first month will be coming actually the 2 weeks or 3 weeks before Resurrection Sunday. And so Passover would be a great opportunity for y'all to learn about Passover during the first month of the year, first fruits, which is resurrection. All of those things be a great time to learn about it. That's just a little plug. Now we will go for questions if there are any questions. And while y'all think of those, I will just look at my notes to make sure I gave y'all all the tea. Oh, I wanted to make sure that I specified that, okay, like for example, in verse 16, it says, a male and female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. It keeps saying this word kind. And I wanted to make sure that we understood that kind is not the same as species. So, or what do we call it? Like, I don't know. They got so many ways to break it down. Like, you know how there might be a brown cow, a black cow, and then like a black and white cow. And I know those are not the scientific names. Well, this kind is just a cow. How that kind splits off is that's just all genetics continuing to parse out the color. So a kind is just a cow. Okay, another example would be birds are a good example because there's usually multiple types of the same species. Another example would be dogs is a great example actually. There's a good little video on Answers in Genesis that explains this about dogs, because dogs just continue to breed. What they're doing is they're breeding out some of the features that we would call a mutt, which a mutt has more genetics and more features and is the actual kind. But then what we do is we breed out certain genetic features that we want or don't want. And that's how we get all these different species of dogs. I don't even know if that's the right term to use, but I just wanted to point out that a kind, when the Bible is using that, is different. A dog is a dog. It can be bred into all these different things, but a dog is a dog. It's like a cow is a cow. A tiger in Asia is the same as a tiger in Africa. If they even have it in Africa, it's the same as a tiger in South America. But the species would develop after the flood, like more into a specific. So God did not have to have, let's say, 5 different cows on the boat. He just needed 2 cows. That's how his species works. So if you ever wondered how like skin color works, same thing. Adam and Eve would have likely been some sort of like fair skin, because as they develop and have children, all the children would have had a part of their like DNA that makes up the skin color. I don't know. It kind of goes back to the I'm thinking of like the 4 square kind of diagram, like back in middle school, where you had to do the genotypes and phenotypes and all that type of stuff. But it's really based on that. It's not like a race of people. That's why racism, or race is not really a thing, because he created humans to be a kind, and so then we could breed out all these different colors, but we're all the same kind. Just like a cow can be a brown cow, a black and white cow. Same kind, different. I don't don't even know the word for it, different variations of that kind. Okay. So that's and if I find the video for Answers in Genesis, I will try to put that in our Bible study guide for tomorrow. I might try to look that up and see, because it was actually a pretty good explanation to explain why there are so many like colors of people and all that kind of stuff. So that is all I have for y'all tonight. As far as yeah, as far as the only other thing I want to mention is that it doesn't show us anything about the fish of the sea. And why would it not show us about the fish of the sea? Because they live in the water. So the fish of the sea would have very easily survived, regardless of how many species was left, because of the fact that they live in water. And so it would have been very difficult for them to actually die because they need the water. So it don't matter how much water, the fish were there. And the fish become important because, as we will learn next week, when the flood waters subsided slowly, what you will find is that there are sea creatures in the sediments of rocks on tops of mountains. How in the world would sediments of rock, would people be able to find sediments of rock that contain fossils of sea life on the top of mountains? Unless they had died in the flood and they were fossilized as the flood waters receded, and that's how it would have happened. And I think next week I'm actually going to show a clip of a video that does a really good job with explaining all this stuff and comparing it to evolution, because the foolishness that they have us out here believing is really ridiculous. But we really need to understand how significant the flood is for our own growth and understanding of the Bible, instead of letting science dictate to us that this is creation. And the next time you go to any type of science exhibit, you will see that it will tell you that the earth is billions of years old. It will tell you that this creature lived billions of years ago, and that's not the case. So in order to know that and understand that, we have to study Genesis, especially this flood stuff, so we can better understand, better grasp with that information. So it's been a pleasure. I've kept y'all long enough. If you have questions, let me know. If anything I can do for you, then you let me know, and I will see y'all next week.